So today's lesson we're going to be talking about adding and subtracting decimals. As you can see right here, I have two examples of one being an adding and one being a subtracting. The big thing to remember is we need to line up the decimal points. With adding and subtracting decimals, as long as you line up the decimal places, everything else is just like normal adding and subtracting. So we have 6.28 plus 3.41 on my question number 1 right here. So what I'm going to do first is line up those decimal points. Now, in this problem it happens to be okay, all right, and we can see that you have 6.28, 3.41. The digits are actually going to line up nice with each other. So we write, let's see here, 6.28. Let's fix that 6 there. All right, 6.28 plus 3.41, 3.41, and I just add straight down. 8 plus 1 is 9. 2 plus 4 is that's 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. And the nice thing is, when I'm adding and subtracting decimals, my decimal, since they had to be lined up right there, they should be lined up right in my answer as well. So my answer, 9.69. And you can see they're all lined up with each other. Now with subtraction, I do the exact same thing. Okay, let's not forget, in case we have to borrow, don't forget to borrow. So you have 8.73 minus 1.52. Okay, and now I just subtract. 3 minus 2, that's going to be 1. 7 minus 5, that is 2. And 8 minus 1, that is 7. Decimal comes straight down to my answer. So my answer is 7.21. Now, those are my basic type of questions. But we're not always going to have nice decimals where they have the same amount of digits and the decimals line up directly nice with each other. So I have two examples down here. And they both happen to be with whole numbers. I have 9 plus 4.21, and I have 14 minus 6.83. Now, the most common thing that people do is when they add these, they're like, oh, okay, 4.21 and 9. And they forget to line up the decimal points, and they go about adding, and they get, 4.30. And then this is the way I like to talk with my kids. I'm like, how did we get from 9 and pretty much 4 back down to 4? All right. We should be able to self-assess and be like, oh, that doesn't make sense. All right, so I need to look at, okay, 9. Where is my decimal point on 9? We always know that with our whole numbers, the decimal point goes to the right of the number. So it's actually 9 point right there. So, and then we can actually do that real quick over here. With 14, it's actually 14 point because it's always to the right of my number. So I come down here and I write 9 points. Okay. Well, now I need 4.21. I need my decimal places to line up. So it goes 4.21. All right, we're adding. And what we need to do now is we need to balance out our problem. All right, I have empty spots up here, so I'm going to fill those empty spots with 0. Notice 9 and 9.00, the exact same thing. All right, it's worth the same value, so I did not change this. We are adding here, so 0 plus 1 is 1, 2 plus 0 is 2, 9 plus 4, that should be 13. Decimal comes straight down in the answer. I get 13.21 for my answer. Now over here on number 4, it should go 14 point, we're subtracting, and 6.83. Remember, that decimal point and this decimal point need to be lined up. 6.83. I see some empty spots. I'm going to fill them with zeros. There's an empty spot. There's an empty spot. And there's actually an empty spot right here also. I'm going to fill that with a 0 also. Now, 0 minus 3. I cannot do that. All right. If I don't have anything, I can't give 3 of that away. Okay, so I need to borrow. I go here. Well, there's nothing to borrow from. It's still a 0. So they go over to the 4 and borrow something from the 4. That becomes a 3. And I like to show this. And that becomes a 10 now. All right, that's a 1 and a 0. Well, this 0 over here, he still doesn't have anything. So he needs to borrow one more time. He borrows from that 10, and it becomes a 9. And that becomes a 10. And now we should be pretty good so far. 10 minus 3, well, that's 7. 9 minus 8, well, that's 1. 3 minus 6, oh, I can't do that. So I need to borrow. That becomes a 0, and that becomes a 13. Now 13 minus 6 I can do. I should get 7. Decimal point comes straight down into the answer, and I get 7.17. So, 3 things to really remember. Number 1, line up the decimal points. You will get it wrong if you do not line up the decimal points. Number 2, add zeros in empty spots. And number 3, don't forget, add and subtract normally. And remember that decimal, literally, just like in number 1, it says line up the decimal points, and the answer, it should also be lined up too. So that's going to be adding and subtracting decimals. Our lesson for today is going to be about multiplying decimals. Now, our last lesson that we did was adding and subtracting decimals, and we learned that we had to line up the decimal points. If we didn't, we were going to get it wrong. Now, for multiplying decimals today, you do not have to line up the decimal points. All right, it's okay if they do, but you don't have to force it, meaning you don't have to add zeros when needed. Now, we can see I have 2 multiplication problems here, and they're both written kind of different. Up here I have that x, that familiar x that we're used to. We are not really going to be using that anymore as our symbol because we're going to be working on algebra later this year, which deals with the letter x a lot. So we're going to get the students more used to seeing it as a dot or through parentheses here. So, like I said, multiplying, you don't have to line up the decimal points. So in this case, 3.24, 2.5, I'm going to write it like a normal multiplication problem. We're going to skip a line down here. Let's see here. 3.24 and then 2.5. And we're multiplying. Alright, well, let's see here. Let's see if I can zoom in on this problem here. Oh, knocking down my camera. Okay. Now, we just multiply normally. 5 times 4, I go up, diagonal, and then all the way around. So 5 times 4 is 20. I put the 0 down and carry my 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Put my 2, carry that 1. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16. I write my 16. I'm going to get rid of these guys because I don't want to get confused. And now what I have to do, because I'm done with my 5, I'm going to put a 0 down to say, hey, I'm done with my 5s. It's a placeholder. It says we're done with our tenths here in the 2.5. Now I'm going to move over to my 1s here of my 2. And now I do 2 times 4, which is 8. 2 times 2, which is 4. And 2 times 3, which is 6. And to finish off here, pen's starting to die, we're going to add straight down. All right, well, 0 and 0 makes 0. 2 and 8, that makes 10, so I put the 0 down and I carry my 1. 6 plus 4 plus 1, that's 11. Put that 1, carry my 1. 1 plus 6 plus 1, that should be 8. So I get 8100. But remember, we're doing 3.24 times 2.5. So there's no way it can be 8100 or 8100. I need to figure out where does that decimal go. To do that, I have to look at both numbers in my problem and look to the right of my decimal. How many numbers were to the right of my decimal? In that first one, there were 2. In that second one, there's just this 5, so there's a 1. So in my answer, it's the sum of these 2 numbers. 2 plus 1, which is 3. So there should be 3 numbers after the decimal point in my answer to the right of the decimal point. So I can start at the end and count back 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to put my decimal point right here. So my answer 8.100, and if you know, those zeros don't have to be there, so you could just write 8.1 for your answer. Now, I go over here to this problem, and this is like I was saying before, when you don't have to line up the decimal points, it's still okay if they do though. So I have 4.1 and 8.9. Alright, notice my decimal points, they line up, but that's okay. I'm just going to multiply normally. 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 4, that's 36. Put a 0 down for my placeholder. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 4 is 32. I'm going to add now. I get 9. Let's see here. 8 plus 6, that's 14. 4, 5, 6. And then a 3. Alright. And just like before, there is one number after the decimal point, to the right of the decimal point. There is one number to the right of the decimal point. So in my answer, it's the sum of those two, which is 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. Start at the end, 1, 2. So my answer, 36.49.